Hey everyone, I want to talk about conclusion paragraphs in this video, but first I just wanted to mention a couple of scheduling things and some other stuff with the class. So I want to remind you that the rough draft was due on Friday of last week. I will still take them and should still be able to give you feedback on them as long as you get them to me by like Wednesday. If you submit it after that, I could probably still give you some points for it, but I might not be able to give you feedback in a manner that's going to help you for when the essay is due, which is now Monday the 1st, right? I hope you guys got my email and saw in the instructions where I mentioned that I moved the date. It was originally due this Friday, but I moved it to Monday just to give you a little more time, to give me some time to get you guys the feedback and to give you more time to revise. The other thing I included in that email and that you'll see on Moodle for this week is that I am making myself available to do WebEx meetings through Moodle on Wednesday. I mean, I guess I'm generally available for this whenever if you want to send me an email. If you'd rather, if you think it would be better to have a video meeting than to just ask whatever questions that you have or whatever confusions through email, I'm definitely open to doing that. And I don't right now have like set times for it, but if you send me an email, we can work it out and we'll figure out a time that works. Generally, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm more available. Tuesday and Thursday, I have more teaching. So yeah, and so for this Wednesday, I wanted to come out and offer this and make sure you guys are aware of this because of the essay being due. I'm sure people are getting worried about what grade they might get on the essay, or are maybe confused about some stuff that my videos have not cleared up enough. So if you go to that discussion thread on the Moodle page for this week, you'll see it says like, what does it say? Sign up or something, and then it says optional. So you can go on there and you can post that you want a meeting and just tell me what time you want it, and we should be able to do that. I'm not quite sure about how the WebEx works for you guys. I know for me, I can just open it up on like before you go into Moodle, the page, like once you log in, it says like WebEx, and you can go in there, and then I know I can create a meeting, and I think I can invite you to it, and then it sends you an email on your Bergen email. So we can do that, yeah, if you want. So yeah, I would encourage you guys to sign up for that just to get a better explanation or ask me any questions. Okay, but let's get into conclusion paragraphs because similar to introductions, I think these are one of the most annoying things about writing an essay, and I think a lot of it has to do with the way that it's been taught and the kind of frame that we have for it. I think the general way that we're taught to write conclusions, especially in high school, maybe even in college, is that they should just be a summary of your argument, right? Restate your argument. And I think understandably, this is frustrating to us because we're like, I just wrote this whole essay. Why am I gonna just repeat the thing, right? So many times students will tell me that one of their biggest problems with writing, like when I do that introduction at the beginning of the course and people talk about strengths and weaknesses, one of the biggest ones I always see is people feel like they're repetitive. They're like, I repeat myself too much. How can I fix this? I think one of the biggest problems with that is the conclusion where teachers have told you to repeat yourself, but say it with different words. And we just know this is stupid, just instinctually we're like, why would I do that? Especially when we were writing 5 paragraph essays, right? Where they were so short. It's like, did you forget what just happened? But even for these slightly longer essays, even for a 4-page essay like the one that we're writing, I don't think it's necessary to just summarize what you have already said. The reader should know, they should remember the gist of it, right? So I think the biggest thing about conclusions is changing the way that we think about them so that we think about them as not just summaries, right? But doing something else. What else should they do? Well, let's think about it. I mean, it should reinforce the argument, I guess, and maybe I'm cheating. Maybe that's just saying restating. But obviously, you want to, hit on the points of your argument again a little bit. You don't want to summarize. You don't have to mention everything. You do want to reinforce the argument. And the other thing that I think we want to do is to answer the question of so what. I think the conclusion is a good place to tell the reader, like, here's why this matters, right? Like, I've been making this argument, in our case, I've been making this argument about these short stories and the messages in them. And now in the conclusion, I'm going to tell you why this matters or why you should care, right? Why should any of us care if the stranger is criticizing Mr. Hammond's possessive behavior? Why should we care if Evelyn, shows us that women don't have real opportunities and things like that? Why does it matter? So I want to tell a quick story that I think kind of is why I started thinking about it this way and something I always go back to. So this goes back to when I was in graduate school, I think, and I had this film professor. This guy was kind of a whack job. I've never felt more like I was on drugs in class without actually being on drugs in class than I was listening to this guy talk about movies and stuff. This guy he was out there. And at the time, I was working at the college's writing center, and this film professor, he wrote a book. It was his first book, which is, a big deal for a professor. So he did a interview kind of question and answer thing in the writing center with another professor, right? The other professors asked him questions about his book, and he just explained it and all that. So there's whatever, like 30 or 40 people gathered around, listening to them talk, and he's explaining his idea for this book, which was very weird. It was about death in the movies. He was very interested in looking at cinema movie depictions of death and what they mean and stuff. And he had this whole thing about looking at the EKG machine. It's like boop boop. He had this whole thing about looking at that as a cinematic technology and about visualizing death. All this crackpot stuff, right? I mean, maybe he was right. Maybe it was interesting. But so he gives this whole speech for an hour, where he's being asked questions and he's explaining all these different movies and the stuff about death. And then at the end of it, he takes questions from the audience. So another English professor who was kind of a hard ass asks a question. She raised her hand and she asked the question. She's like, "So I see what you're saying about death and movies and representing death and all these things, but so what?" And he was kind of taken aback, right? He was like, "Well, I think there's a number of takeaways here. I think it's important for this reason," and then, and he explained why it was important. And then I remember once the thing was over, they had coffee and cookies and stuff, and I was getting some coffee, and I heard one of the professors say to someone else, how could she ask that? How could she ask so what after this guy just explained this whole book? And that always just kind of stuck with me because if you're writing an essay or a book, that is kind of the worst case scenario. That after hearing the whole thing, I mean, I guess she didn't read the whole book. Maybe if she read the book, she would have got it. But if after reading your essay, the audience is asking, "So what?" That's kind of a failure on our part, right? We need to let them know, "So what?" So I think the conclusion paragraph is a good place to do this. It's a good place to give the audience a sense of the bigger picture or the takeaway. So yeah, you probably want to mention your argument in the conclusion, but I would also tell the reader, and here's why this matters, as the essay ends and they move on to other things. So yeah, you want to tell them why we should care about this. That's another thing. I think this is very under talked about when it comes to writing essays, is that we need to let the reader know why they should care, or else why will they, right? And I think I'm going to do another video, and this relates to that reading I gave you about audience, right? Thinking about your audience. And so many times when we think about the professor as the audience, this question never comes up because, it's the professor's job to read your essay. So we don't have to worry about why they should care. They gave the assignment. But to write the best essay in this class and in any other, you have to think about a larger audience, and for that reason, you have to tell them why any of this matters, why they should care, what message the story's sending, what are the larger implications, what's the bigger picture, what should they be thinking about once they put your essay down and go back to other things, what is the thing that you want to stick in their head. Another way to think about this is, and maybe this isn't for our essay, but for other kinds of essays, another way to do the conclusion is to answer the question of what now? This reminds me of, I remember I used to do an assignment where, I forget what the assignment was really, but a student, I remember, did an essay about the environment, right? It was an argument essay about here are some things we need to do to fix pollution or whatever. And I remember thinking that that's the kind of essay that it would be cool to end it by telling people okay, here's what you can do now, right? To try to make pollution better. Whoa, whatever, politicians or things you can do in your own life to help with pollution. So I think that's another good way to frame a conclusion is telling the reader what they should do now. But for our purposes, I think we want to tell them why this matters, answer the question of so what, and give them a sense of the bigger picture. So I know this doesn't make it easy, But I hope that by kind of reorienting what we think the goal of a conclusion paragraph is, it can make it a little less painful, a little less repetitive, and maybe actually add something to the paper. Because if we're just summarizing, we're not adding anything. I mean, it's true that you don't want to introduce like new evidence in your conclusion, right? All your evidence should have been given already, but you can tell us why we should care about this, what we should do now, how this maybe should affect like how we think about stuff going forward. So I hope that helps a little bit when we're thinking about conclusion paragraphs as you guys start to write them. Okay, that's all for this one.